I lied. How's that for a cold open for you? Welcome back, everyone. I'm the Bella Gamer, and you might be a little confused about the cold open there. Last time I did a Lancer video, I said the Zang was the last video I had yet to do, and I lied. I was wrong, or at least, I was incorrect would probably be more accurate. I didn't do the Emperor, which the Emperor is genuinely a really good mech. One I find very interesting, and one that I feel like is one that I've overlooked. I mean, obviously I've overlooked since I skipped the video, but this is actually a really interesting mech. Also, I gotta say, look at the energy, right? Look at the energy. The pilot and the mech have such the same energy. It's super interesting. And I love how they added a tassel to this mech frame. Just the whole theme of the Emperor is kind of like royalty, ostentatious. Like anything Emperor related in theme is what we're getting here with the Emperor. Now, before we really get into it, I also got to say as well, being a support artillery frame is so my jam. It's something where like I love long distance fighters and I love supporting the team in some form or fashion. But I would state even more than this, the Emperor is kind of like a death by 1,000 cuts style of license overall, which is really cool. It's something that as long as the Emperor is on the battlefield, the enemy is going to start slowly but surely moving towards death, which is such a cool concept for such a goofy kind of mech. It's really, really good. Anyway, let's go ahead and take a look at the stats for what is now truly, I'm sure this time, maybe, the last frame/license to date that has not, until a new book comes out anyway. So let's go ahead and take a look at the Emperor. All right, so starting off with the base attributes, you can see something that, doesn't quite fit. 2 HP, 2 HP. That's less than a goblin, which, by the way, I gotta state as well, the Emperor is a size 1 mech. It has less HP, less hull than a goblin, which is insane. Like, here's the goblin right here. That you can see the dude just there. Like, just mech fire, like mech size round could obliterate this dude. But we look here above my head. It has, right here, sorry. It has 3 times the amount of hull points that the Emperor has. Now, there's a good reason for that. I mean, it has to have a good reason, right? Like, most light weapons could structure out this mech with very little problem. So there's a good reason for this, but I do gotta say that I personally would think actually, now I think about it, the Emperor has as much HP as like a person does, maybe a little bit more technically speaking, because like a person in the setting, like a human being, has 6 HP. And considering that many of the mechs have a total of 4 structure, right? That means the Emperor itself has 8 base hull points worth. To fix this, 2 things. One thing really. I would have just made the Emperor a size 1/2 mech. There's actually no real reason for the Emperor to be a size 1 mech, and at least when it's a size 1/2 mech, it's barely bigger than a person, like maybe like 8 feet tall at max, and you got some padding and all that kind of stuff that I could at least see somewhat for sure. But a size 1 mech, no matter what reason they have for the low HP, which it is more of a game reason than anything, I can't believe that amount of hull points. I think that is ludicrous and a bit immersion breaking, if you ask me personally. Now, there is a major reason for this, and you could say a variety of things, but honestly, the fact that this thing is barely sturdier than a person, and even then, it's probably likely to get severely damaged before getting to that, 8 total damage. I I think it's ludicrous. I wish this was a size 1/2 mech. I think that would have made a lot more sense. And it would have made the Emperor honestly have a way more interesting, like, style. You know, the design could have been something that was a lot more interesting. Because like I said, even the Goblin has 6 hull points for 4 total structure, meaning that it has a minimum of 24 HP, way more than a human or, you know, whatever. So it's such a weird part. And like, this is kind of one of those parts where the narrative doesn't really match the mechanics, but there is a strong reason as to why this is. But before we talk about that, I want to get rid of the rest, or I want to finish talking about the rest of the attributes so that we can get that out of the way. So almost no HP, 0 armor, super squishy mech. It has a decent evasion, average E defense, though you would figure something like this would have more E defense because that sounds really bad potentially. Its heat capacity is also not that high at 5, you know, in the kind of average range. Its sensors is really good though at 15. It has a tech attack bonus of 1 and a save target of 11, which means this is definitely a more hackery / ability based mech, which makes a lot of sense. It's actually pretty fast too. Speed 5 is pretty good, and it has a decent amount, technically the average, though probably more than a lot of mechs, system points, which means, again, this has a lot of room for all kinds of hacking material, all kinds of different, you know, software systems, all that kind of stuff that can be really good for this mech. It also has a really bad repair capacity, which, I mean, I understand. There's really no point in repairing these things after they get damaged because the pilot is probably dead. So, you know, but like I said, there is a really good reason. And in all honesty, this mech is probably one of the tankiest mechs in the game. So it's all game balance. Let's talk about that here with the Storm Shield. So, Storm Shield. The Emperor's hull points is not increased by its pilot's grit, but it is increased if you invest in its hull, so something to keep in mind. The Emperor gains overshield equal to 6 plus grit. This overshield refreshes anytime the Emperor would take structure damage. So, in actuality, the Emperor itself has, at base, not including grit, like as just a pure machine, 8 HP, which makes it generally average with the rest of the mechs. Though hull, I would say, has a lot more benefits for the Emperor because you have such a low base hull that like you just can increase your HP by a lot and you get this overshield, and so many different things interact with overshield. I like the idea of a mech that has a big energy shield to kind of protect itself with. I just, like I said, I wish this was a size 1/2 mech. I wouldn't have any problems if it was a size 1/2 mech, because then you could just say, well, rather than putting any kind of padding like they do with the Goblin or the Caliban, for instance, this has like a special storm shield generator that creates this shield so the pilot can move freely and not be as restrained. Many of the systems, you know, there's all kinds of stuff. So, you know, honestly, I feel like a size 1/2 would have just made more sense. But regardless, here we are. Anyway, there's some other really cool traits here as well. In fact, the Emperor having some of the most interesting traits, I think, of most of the mechs in the game makes it definitely something to keep an eye on. So next is Imperial Vestment. We're going to be seeing a lot of Imperial, Sovereign, King, whatever kind of things. That is the whole theme of this particular mech. But with Imperial Investment, whenever the Emperor grants overshield to another character, it gains the same amount of overshield. Now, if the Emperor gains overshield from any source, including this particular trait, its current overshield is added, or it's added to its current overshield up to a maximum amount of its storm shield. So the Emperor, unlike other mechs, kind of gets its temp HP, its overshield, and can keep stacking on it until it gets to, 6 plus grit, which is a pretty good amount. And it's so easy for the Emperor to gain overshield very constantly. And there's so many other systems in the game that can give you overshield that I would say that for very easily, the Emperor is going to be tankier than most mechs out there who aren't heavily armored. So it's it's funny that the whole part, the whole thing I began talking with is how squishy this mech is. But I'm just talking about that from purely a thematic standpoint. Like, you're in a size 1 mech, but it offers less overall protection than if you were out in your own like suit. You know, that's the part that I was talking about. But this is a really, really tanky mech, honestly, which is kind of cool, honestly. I really do like this, though you do got to be careful because there may be some scenarios or some events that affect overshield. You know, the GM can always come up with something that might interfere with shielding of any kind. So, you know, you got to choose this mech in the right situations, but most of the time, it's a pretty sturdy mech, honestly. And the final trait we have is Sovereign Presence. Once per round, whenever the Emperor targets a character with an attack, it can condemn that character, forcing them to make an engineering save, and on failure, the target takes +1 damage anytime they take damage until the start of the Emperor's next turn, making the Emperor really, really good to start off a combat round and then to finish off the next combat round, giving everyone a lot of opportunity to deal damage as long as the Emperor is safe, which the Emperor is a very safe mech for more reasons than just its massive overshield. Now, as you can also see here, we have a singular mount, which is a main mount. That's very tragic, and again, that would make a lot more sense if this was a size 1/2 mech, because then you could say the law of the system is dedicated to just protecting the pilot and they can't add a lot of weapons. I'm such a narratively driven person, and there's just some parts of it that, like, if this one change was made, this would make so much more sense. But it has a main mount because it actually comes with a core integrated weapon, which is also a main. So technically, this has 2 main weapon potential, but you're mostly going to be using the Marathon arc bow and whatever other weapon you see fit, probably the one that is with the license that we'll talk about here in a little bit. So before we talk about its active system, the Xerxes Apex, let's talk about its integrated weapon, the Marathon arc bow. So the Marathon arc bow is very interesting because it's a main launcher weapon. So if you have any preference for launcher weapons, that's kind of cool. And it does a 15 line for a D6 energy damage. And it's armor piercing. So it's actually not bad. This is really, really good against a lot of standard mechs because energy damage is not super resisted amongst the NPCs we currently have in the game. But in addition to that, this is also just armor piercing. So even heavier mechs are not protected. Now, the interesting thing about this is a 15 line is massive. That's a lot of area, but that could also put your allies in harm's way. Except not with this weapon, because the Marathon arc bow doesn't damage allies. In fact, allied characters in the area gain an overcharged overshield, which increases its overshield by +4, or if they don't have an overshield, gives them an overshield of 2, which is pretty good. So this is not only for offensive capability, a pretty decent offensive launcher weapon that's long range, but also is a buff weapon as well, as you could choose to just attack your allies to give them, you know, an energy shield. Like, there would be plenty of opportunities. Your allies are lined up just right, and you're like, ooh, I could do damage, or I could give our team like a collective, you know, 2 times number of allies bonus shielding, or more if they're already shielded, which is a massive tactical advantage. Now, the active system, the Xerxes Apex, is actually connected directly to the Marathon arc bow. So as a protocol, you can activate the Xerxes Apex, and every time or any mech targeted by the Marathon arc bow releases a bolt of lightning after the attack resolves. So the attack must resolve first, so you're not accidentally like doing extra damage to an enemy who's already dead, which is kind of cool. And this bolt of lightning strikes a character within range 3 of the target. And that same bolt can strike the very same target who procced the bolt of lightning. It just curves around and strikes back at them. Now, this bolt of lightning does 2 armor-piercing energy damage. Oh, it doesn't say energy damage. That's interesting. It just deals 2 AP damage. It's probably any energy damage because it's lightning, you know, but it doesn't actually say here, which is interesting. it should say energy damage. I would have to say it would have to, or this can give a target +2 overshield. Now that's +2 overshield, not 2 overshield. The same character can be struck by multiple bolts. So this is really good if your allies already have overshield, but the multiple bolts part is very interesting because you could, if 3 enemies are perfectly lined up and you shoot your laser through all 3 of them, you could have all 3 of the lightning bolts strike one of those targets, dealing 6 armor-piercing damage along with the armor-piercing marathon arc bow damage, which could be devastating. And potentially, if an ally has overshield and they're near several enemies, you could give that ally a massive overshield. Now, the one issue I kind of have with this as far as mechanics are concerned is the marathon bow itself states, and I'm actually hiding it behind my head, so maybe I can turn. There you go. So it states right here, but clearing all overshield at the end of their next turn, which means that the overshield boosting, the overcharged shield, is limited by time. But the Xerxes Apex overshield bonus does not have a special limiter and thus can just theoretically keep going forever. You could keep giving an ally +2 overshield, +2 overshield, +2 overshield because it's +2 overshield. Now, this doesn't work when an ally doesn't have overshield, but if an ally does have overshield, say, for instance, you're fighting along another emperor, they always have overshield typically, So it's something where there's a lot of little bits here that are not thought through all the way. But I do like this a lot. The Xerxes is really, the Xerxes Apex is really cool, but the Emperor is really cool. It has this interesting play style, and while there are some aspects to it that are not, I feel like, are not well thought out, I do love the style of play. This whole mech is designed for long-range fire and supporting in the same breath, which is really cool and pretty unique amongst many of the other mechs. There's actually not a lot of really long distance base mechs in Lancer right now anyway, like just a handful, just a few, and not many weapons with that much distance. So the Emperor is really good, and because it's very save based as well, especially with its condemn ability, you're probably gonna want to go into Horus so that you can get their really powerful core bonuses that can make that save even higher. But yeah, so the Emperor is really, really interesting, but we're not done yet. Let's go ahead and take a look at the license. So starting off, we have the Bolt's Nexus. I love weapons in the first tier of any license. There's a lot of them, and this one is pretty cool. And this is kind of where their Death by 1,000 Cuts part really comes in. So first of all, you'll notice this is a main Nexus weapon. I love Nexus weapons, but it only does 1 energy damage, and it has a range of 10, which is a little sad considering the Emperor can normally strike an enemy up to 15 hexes away with its core integrated weapon. But that's for a very specific reason, because on hit with this weapon, the target gains the acquired profile this weapon gains the acquired profile when shooting that target, until that target either dies or a new character is struck with the weapon. So, and it's also a smart weapon, so it's really good against enemies that are very defensive, but don't have really good tech. So there's a lot of enemies, pirates, all that kind of stuff. This would be a very good weapon to use against them with. Now, the acquired profile is a lot more. It first doubles the range and quadruples the damage, making a very good long-range weapon that does 4 energy damage, but this energy damage is reliable. It's also a seeking and smart weapon, meaning there's almost no way to get away from this unless you can cover yourself on all sides. 20 range is absolutely massive, and the bolt will find its targets as long as there's some applicable route to do so. And because it's reliable, even if the Emperor misses, you're going to be doing that for energy damage. Now, this is a really cool weapon. I absolutely love this, and I like this as a priority targeting weapon. This is not actually a very good weapon against targets that are very heavily armored. And a target with 2 or more armor is just going to be able to eat these bolt nexuses for breakfast, and it's not going to be a good use of your time. Many of the base NPC enemies out there have around 10 to 15 hull points and have 1 to 2 armor, meaning that you are going to have to strike them 5 times on average in order to actually take them down, and that's a massive amount of time in combat. So, unless you're overcharging constantly, but even then, you can only really cut that in half. So even though this is a really good, reliable weapon, the Bolt Nexus itself is mostly designed for dealing with light armor enemies who are typically in the background. I also like this weapon because it offers a very interesting playstyle where you shoot the enemy and then you run away. You shoot and then you run and boost and get out of there because you can hit them from so far away that either the enemy pursues you deep into your team's territory, making them incredibly vulnerable, or has to run away or do something, or they're just going to get plinked over and over and over again as you're shooting them from safety. It's a very powerful effect. I really do like this weapon a lot, and it adds a very interesting playstyle. Many of the weapons out there are very straightforward. It's a weapon, it does damage in a very specific way, and is good in specific situations. And while this is a weapon that is good in specific situations, it also offers a very unique playstyle of you just kind of go hide out. You can jump into like a dilapidated building or something and just shoot a bolt that flies out, wings around, and strikes a target. It's absolutely amazing. I love the Bolt Nexus. It's a really, really cool weapon. Not a good DPR weapon, but a really good weapon for interesting playstyles. Also here at level 1 of the license, we also have Dominion's Breath. So this is a quick tech action that you can activate to give one character in line of sight and within sensors 1 overshield. Now this is, 1 overshield's not a lot. Now this actually has some really good benefits with the Emperor in general. Since it's a quick tech, you could throw this on an ally, then shoot your marathon bow so that you can give them a +2 boost to their overshield, which is, or a +4 boost to their overshield potentially, which is really good. But this is actually an offensive system, believe it or not. So for 2 tech or system points, this overshield, when it depletes, releases a burst to electric pulse, damaging all hostile characters in the affected area, giving them 2 AP energy damage, and then they must succeed an energy saving throw or become impaired until the end of their next turn. That's really good. So what you would do typically, and why this is actually really good with the Bolt Nexus, is you would throw this on an enemy, then skirmish to shoot your weapon, likely hit, likely do some damage, get rid of that overshield. Sure, the enemy didn't take a lot, but if you're using the Bolt Nexus, the first shot is mostly just to target them anyway. And then they explode, taking 2 AP energy damage and damaging everyone around them, and possibly even becoming impaired. That's a very powerful combo, and it's really good. It's really easy to use, honestly, in combat, especially because the Emperor is so fast. You could still do all this and move a good distance away from the enemy behind allied lines. So that being said, I really do like this. It's a very interesting one that has some good support potential. You know, overcharging it with your Marathon Arc weapon, or just anything that can give your ally bonus overshield, which we have a lot of with the Emperor. But it's also technically a really good offensive system as well, which I think is really interesting. So Dominion's Breath is actually really, really cool, and I do like this quick tech a lot. Now at rank 2, along with the frame, we get Imperial Eye, or the Imperial Eye. This is another 2-point system, and we get another quick tech called Activate the Imperial Eye. So an allied mech, this one is for allies specifically, gains a disruptive charge until the start of your next turn. When a hostile character enters a space within range 3 of the target, so actually if you use this on a larger ally, like size 2 or more, this actually technically gets a larger zone, which is kind of cool. The disruptive charge sparks out to that character, then dissipates. They take 2 AP energy damage, and then must succeed on an engineering save or be knocked back to knocked prone and shredded until the end of their next turn, which I guess they're prone until the end of their next turn because of how that line reads, which is really devastating. That means their first move, they move up, get blasted back, and are grounded until that's devastating. That's terrible. You want your saves to be huge if you're using this one in particular. Though, an interesting part, and actually one I really like, is characters that start their turn within the range of the target are unaffected until they move outside of the area and re-enter it. This prevents your allies from I guess they could still move. Well, yeah. This does prevent your allies from abusing this because they can't just move into enemies, forcing them to get jolted back and flattened out when they start their turn. But there's actually another use for this. If you have an ally who is like the Blackbeard, for instance, who's very into grappling enemies, or just an ally who's just upfront and personal with an enemy, you can kind of prevent other enemies from joining in on this kind of engagement, causing them to bounce out, allowing your ally to effectively 1v1 or 1v2 some enemies. Really good. This is very useful in many different situations, whether you want to throw this on an assassin mech who's diving into the back line and doesn't want to get interrupted, or you're throwing this on a ally you want to protect, more of a supporter, and you want to make sure that no enemies kind of run up on them. There's all kinds of ways that this one in particular is really good, as long as the enemy isn't particularly good with their energy saving throws. I mean, if they are, at least they're still taking 2 AP energy damage, but that's not going to be enough to stop, especially the types of enemies who do want to get in close and personal. And as you're seeing here, there's a lot of ways we can just drop armor-piercing energy damage into a lot of abilities for our allies, against our foes, all that kind of stuff. So the Emperor every round is just setting up more and more ways enemies can just get chipped for a little bit of AP energy damage, which is really good. All right. We have another system here. I'm going to try to pronounce the name. There's just a lot of weird names for the remainder of the license, so rather than going through all the effort of like learning how to pronounce them, I'm just gonna do my best. So this is the Shahnameh. That's what I'm going with, the Shahnameh. Anyway, the Shah is a 3-point system that is pretty good. So you activate it. It's another quick tech. And an allied mech within sensors in line of sight gains a overshield equal to 4 plus grit. Massive overshield. And while they have this overshield, they have resistance to heat inflicted by other characters. And if they lose this overshield for any reason, they clear all heat, not just heat given to them by other characters. What makes this absolutely insane is, one, it's a really good overshield. 4 plus grit is pretty substantial, but more than that, you actually have a reason to maintain this overshield or to let it drop, because it does something beneficial either way. Getting resistance to all heat inflicted by other characters makes it really good against certain types of enemies who are very likely to try to overheat your mech, like a lot of hacker mechs out there. But if you're playing a mech that uses a ton of heat, then you want to go right into the fray of enemies. They have to try to kill you or you're going to kill them. So they have to shoot down this overshield, which is going to clear your heat, allowing you to keep putting on the fire, which is really good. So throwing this on to something like the Genghis is genuinely really good. And it's a limited 3 system, which means that's a lot of good uses in combat. So the Shah is really interesting. I really do like this one. It has, again, a lot of interesting use. I love very dynamic mechs. I like mechs that can adapt to a lot of different situations. And the Emperor is proving that they can really adapt to any kind of situation, making them a very powerful pick. So if you do like supporting and if you like to use your brain in combat, the Emperor is definitely a license I'd be keeping my eye on. All right, and before we get into that, I want to say, first of all, that if you're enjoying the content, please leave a like. And in fact, if you are watching any kind of tabletop content out there, I recommend leaving a like on any videos you watch, not just mine. tabletop is on the rise. It has been for a few years, and with D&D's kind of lackluster release of its 2024, I think other games are going to start getting a chance to shine. And so for variety channels or just tabletop channels in general, we want to show the algorithm that we're interested in this kind of content. So any way you interact with the video, whether it's liking, commenting, or even subscribing on a video, then I definitely recommend doing so, because I want more people to see tabletop content, which means making our stuff more algorithm viable. And if you like my content specifically, I try to cover a large range of games. I am hopefully now getting done with the final license from Lancer, and we'll be looking into third-party content. I'll be doing some builds and all kinds of stuff like that. So if you like either, non-traditional TTRPGs, or if you really like my Lancer content, I definitely recommend the subscribe. All right, I'm scared. The Ayah of the syzygy. I'm sorry. Why is not a vowel? It's a vowel sometimes. There are no vowels in this word. This is a bullshit word. I'm not even going to look it up. Out of principle, there should be no word that exists with so many Z's and Y's in it. There's 3 Y's in this word. The Ayah part, got it. Anyway, Ayah is a 2-point system, and it comes with a interesting action. So you can activate this as a quick action. You create a blast to space on the field and within line of sight. So within sensors, line of sight, the first time each time any hostile character in this area is hit by a ranged or melee attack, they release a discharge of energy, and all hostile characters, at least partly in the area, including the original character, take an additional 2 AP energy damage. This effect lasts for the rest of the scene or until you take this action again. So why this is really good, especially because we have the bolt nexus in this license, is quick action, throw this out, skirmish bolt nexus, hit the enemy, and then boom, bunch of AP damage, can hit multiple targets, and really good for zoning purposes. This is actually a really good control ability, and this can be worked out on a lot of different mechs out there. This is a really good way to just add energy damage to a build, like not even including just doing it for the sake of like helping out your team, for instance. You can throw this on a lot of different mech frames, and they just run up to an enemy, drop this field, boom, instant 2 AP energy damage. Is it as good as like doing a full barrage? Maybe not, but it could force enemies out of a zone unless they want to get zapped over and over. And depending on how many enemies you can fit into this plus 2 zone, it actually might be worth more than a full barrage, making it a really good damage option, actually. So not only does this work really well with the Emperor and the Bolt Nexus weapon in the license, but it works on a lot of different mechs as well. So Ayah is really, really good, actually. And traditionally, I always hate the final system in any license, but this is not one of those cases, because the Walk of Kings, not only having a cool name, is actually really good too. So we got 3 system points here, and it's another quick tech action. There's so many of them in this license. And when you activate it, an allied character within sensors and line of sight gains an overshield of 4+ crit. Very similar to Shahnameh from before, but this one does something different. So while this overshield is active, all melee attacks gain armor piercing, and the first time each turn that the target of this ability would either hit with a melee attack or take damage from a hostile character, they release a burst 1 energy blast centered on them, and all hostile characters in the affected area take 1 AP energy damage. This is insanely good, and again, another really good one to throw onto a more offensive frame, because say you're running up on the enemy and you just want to punish a bunch of enemies and give yourself some really good tankiness. Boom, quick tech on yourself, bunch of overshield, and when you attack an enemy, you're going to burst, dealing an additional 1 AP energy damage. It's really good. Now, this is limited, which does make it a little bit harder to use, but with a little bit of engineering, that's not necessarily going to be the case. But this is really good. I could see, again, this being used on so many different frames. The Emperor itself is a very good license purely for the fact that it is so dynamic that much of its license not just only works with the Emperor. There's no specific requirements for a lot of this kind of stuff besides maybe a higher save target just because there's a lot of save-based abilities. But like this ability, the Walk of Kings, is really good for pretty much anyone. If you're a melee mech, getting the Walk of Kings might be really worth it. And in fact, if you're a melee mech and you want a really good weapon for range purposes, the Bolt Nexus might actually be really good. Like, the Emperor is itself very, very good. The mech frame itself, despite having, you know, some narrative qualms with it, I think is a very interesting frame. I think it's very fun to play with. And I don't think any part of the Emperor really is specific to one style of play. Like, sure, it definitely doesn't necessarily want to be upfront and personal with the enemies, but it has about as much hull points as another mech, typically talking. So it could be a melee mech if you really wanted to. And you could get armor onto this mech. Not a lot, but you could get some, which could be really good. So I do think that this mech is really good. Many parts of the license are a really good add-on, and I like the overall style. I love dynamic frames. I like frames that can be played in a lot of different ways and a license that can be picked up for a lot of different kinds of builds. So I gotta say, Emperor is like A or S tier as far as frames and licenses are concerned, at least in my book. But that is, I think, the last one. Let me double check. You know what? We'll double check here live. Well, live for me, not for you guys. So dun 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 dun. All right. All this is good. I think. I'm pretty sure I've done the Sun Z. Let me double check real quick. Yep. Done the Sun Z. Okay. Now we are officially done with all the core licenses that are currently released. Of course, when any new ones come out, I will be covering those as well. The Emperor is very interesting. This actually turned into a little bit of a longer video just because I feel like this is such a fun mech. It's very interesting. And being the last one, this time for sure, I wanted to really get into it, and I haven't really done a lot of Lancer content. I'm sorry about that. Paizo has done nothing but release books since like June, and I have a lot of personal life stuff going on right now, so it's been a little bit hard, but it's the end of the year. There's not really any big releases as far as Paizo is concerned for at least a few months. So I get to check out some other games. I still got some more Pathfinder 2nd Edition videos if you're concerned about that at all. But I'm just saying that I'm going to be doing a little bit more variety for the near future. And I got some interesting videos, you know, on the way. So if you want to see any of those videos, or subscribe, or check out the Discord linked in the description below, where you'll get a notification every time I make a video rather than relying on YouTube's somewhat finicky system. I enjoy this so much, and I hope you did as well. Let me know down in the comments what you would like for me to cover as far as Lancer is concerned, but that's going to be it for me. Thank you all so much for watching. Good luck with your games. Leave the bad luck to me, and I'll see y'all next time. Bye.